fail to keep the exiles from penetrating the outer perimeter, this could be disastrous. You will find and destroy them immediately. Do not fail us again.
The Kushan fleet had succeeded in penetrating the inner rim of the galaxy. The exiles would now have to fight the Taidan Empire in their own territory. However, the Imperial defensive lines guarding their space were still too strong for the Kushans to challenge directly. But no fortification was impenetrable, and often contained a weakness that could be exploited by a cunning enemy. This weakness came in the form of an area of space inhabited by a single Taidani research station studying a supernova. The harmful radiation emitted from the dying star discouraged large assemblages, so the station was only lightly protected by a small defense fleet. But in a stroke of luck for the Kushans, dust clouds that led to the station could protect their ships from the supernova's effects and the Taidan sensors until they got in weapons range of the research station. But the Taidan fleet were well aware of this obvious blind, and made sure to mine the clouds to discourage any intruders from interfering with their operations. But that was not all. In addition to a small fleet consisting of a carrier, strike craft, and a collection of destroyers, this would be where the fleet of exiles would meet the most powerful ship in the Taidani arsenal, the Quarjet heavy cruiser. Bigger, tougher, and more heavily armed than anything else in their navy, this super capital ship was more than an effective guard dog to keep out trespassers. But this beast had never faced a group as tenacious or capable as the Kushans before. Taking a slow but steady pace through a dust cloud, the Kushan fleet cleared out the mines and stopped cold any ship that tried to escape and warned the station. When the fleet did finally come out of the dust, the station and its guards were caught completely unawares. In a short but furious battle, the Kushans ripped apart the Taidani defenders. Even the Quarjet struggled to overcome the wrath of the exiles until even it too fell. The way was now open to continue their journey into the galactic core. But before the exiles could move on, the research station itself was a treasure trove of information about Taidan tactical data and the means to access their communications networks. It was perhaps this access that allowed for fleet intelligence to intercept a transmission from Taidan Emperor Riestiuu IV II, ordering an attack on the Bentusi, both as punishment for aiding the Kushans and to prevent them from bringing the affair of the exiles to the Galactic Council, and gain their support to be used against him. Not willing to let the Bentusi be slaughtered by the forces of the Mad Emperor, Karen Sajet, in her role as fleet command, made immediate preparations to hyperspace the fleet to a region of space called the Tenhauser Gate, where the ambush was to take place. A short time later, emerging from hyperspace, the mothership sensors did indeed find a Taidan fleet already assaulting a heavily damaged Bentusi exchange ship. Time became of the essence. The Bentusi would not last much longer against the onslaught of their firepower. Rushing forth, the Kushans charged headfirst into the Taidani ships, determined to protect their only friends in the galaxy since the burning of Karak. There was no time for cunning or strategy. This battle was essentially one gigantic brawl between two fleets until one emerged triumphant, which of course would be the Kushan. With the Taidan ships reduced to space debris and a moment to take stock, the Bentusi opened communications with the mothership and Karen Sajet directly. With the intervention of her fleet in rescuing their ship, the Bentusi felt compelled to share certain information with Karen and her people, knowledge that, up to this point, was forbidden, which was the lost history of the Kushan people. In the first time, long ago, a war that spanned the galaxy brought the Kushan people to their knees. Only a united cry for mercy from the other sentients of the galaxy prevented their total extinction by their enemies, the Taidani. So instead, an alternative was found: exile. The Taidan would take possession of Hiigara and establish it as their new capital world, whereas the Kushans were forced to board sublight transport ships similar to that of the Kartoba and be sent on a one-way course to the outer rim of the galaxy. Any form of contact or aid by the other spacefaring races was strictly forbidden, and knowledge of their existence was to be systematically erased. Over the course of the long exodus, many of the ships in the convoy would fall prey to the dangers of the galaxy, while others simply fell apart due to aging technology and poor construction, and even some going their own way to find the means to their survival as a people elsewhere. Finally, one ship managed to make it to the world that was to be their new home, Karak. In time, the Kushans would forget their history, their legacy, as the histories of old became myth and legend, the only reminders of their glorious heritage being the hyperspace core and the guide stone, which was carved from Hiigarans' angel moon. But now, knowledge of the exiles' journey was becoming known to the Galactic Council, with many of its races having prophesied the return of the Kushans. Before they parted, the Bentusi implored Karen Sajet and her people to find their homeworld, while they summoned the council, ostensibly to help the Kushans claim it. Perhaps buoyed by a new sense of purpose, the exiles continued their journey, but as they were moving through hyperspace, the quantum waveform generated by the mothership Hyperspace Core began collapsing for an unknown reason, forcing the Kushans to drop back into normal space, where, surprisingly or unsurprisingly, a Taidan fleet waited to greet them with ion cannons and mass drivers at the ready. What the Taidan fleet had done was set up a series of gravity well generators, which, as their name implied, generated a gravity well that could interrupt the hyperspace systems of ships traveling nearby and prevent their escape. But that was not all. The gravity well generators also could disable the propulsion systems of any corvette or fighter-class strike craft, rendering them essentially dead in space. Fortunately, frigate classes and larger were unaffected. Knowing this, the Taidan marauders focused their attack on the smaller Kushan craft, intending to finish the job that the burning of Karak started. But even with this handicap, the Kushan warriors refused to give in to despair, and steeled themselves for another battle against overwhelming odds. And eventually, the Kushans were able to overcome the Taidani, destroying their warships and the gravity well generators barring the way to their homeworld. But as the last generator faded into the space of the galactic core, the universe was set to throw the Kushans another curveball. A Taidani destroyer, an elite guard vessel named the Capella under command of one Captain Elson, was on an intercept course with the mothership. While en route, Elson was broadcasting his intention to defect to the Kushan fleet. However, his ship was under heavy fire by Taidan loyalists who were fully resolved to stop his defection. If he was to survive for much longer, he would need the help of the Kushans. Wary, but willing to help the destroyer, Fleet Intelligence ordered the rescue of the Capella, crushing Elson's pursuers and bringing his ship into the fleet proper. Once brought aboard the mothership, a grateful Captain Elson explained to Fleet Command that a full-on rebellion was happening within the Taidan Empire. Discontent had been slowly brewing under the surface for centuries due to the Empire's continual downward slide into corruption and tyranny. But it was the use of the atmosphere deprivation device during the burn that finally ignited the rebellion. The use of such a forbidden technology that resulted in the near annihilation of another people was the final straw that drove many within the Empire to rebel. Through his actions, Emperor Riestiuu had demonstrated to the galaxy that his madness and paranoia had become too dangerous to simply ignore. If he and the exile fleet could reach a place called the Karos graveyard, they could find a hidden communications relay to make contact with the other rebel forces. And together, maybe they could forcibly dethrone Emperor Riestiuu and create a better future for both their peoples. The Karos graveyard was the perfect place to hide such a relay, as the Taidan Navy seemingly ignored the area, possibly due to it being guarded by automated guns that attacked anything their artificial intelligence deemed to be a threat. In addition, the graveyard was home to a robotic warden nicknamed the Junkyard Dog, a heavily armored, seemingly invincible ship that would take trespassing vessels and forcibly place them elsewhere. Due to these factors, it can be assumed that there was nothing in the graveyard that would warrant an expedition, so the Empire was content to ignore it. Unfortunately, while this made the relay secure, a sizable contingent of warships would be needed to force their way past the defenses and activate the means to fully mobilize the Taidan rebellion. When the mothership fleet entered the Karos graveyard, it did not take them long to encounter the Junkyard Dog, but upon some analysis, a critical weakness was discovered, a weakness that could be exploited upon thanks to the lessons learned from a previous engagement the exiles fought in shortly after they emerged from the Garden of Kadesh. During that battle, a ghost ship used some form of control field that allowed it to take over almost any vessel that approached it. By using the data gained from this encounter, the Kushans were able to construct a mobile gravity well generator, and then proceeded to send it on a one-way course to the junkyard dog. When the robotic canine closed in on the seemingly helpless prey, it found itself trapped and unable to move within the generator's artificial gravity. The Kushan fleet then brought all their guns to bear on the junkyard dog. Even with its armor, it could not withstand a continuous bombardment of mass drivers and ion cannons for long. And in a surprising amount of time, the former guardian of Karos rejoined the rest of the graveyard, in pieces. With the junkyard dog now destroyed, the Kushan fleet turned its attention to the automated sentry guns surrounding the relay, which quickly became easy pickings for the fleet's guns. Once the hidden comm relay was clear of hostiles, Captain Elson was able to reach the array to contact his people, and after a short amount of time had passed, he informed Fleet Command that the Taidan resistance was beginning to mobilize. The fall of the Taidan Empire had just begun. The next step before the Kushan fleet could move further into Imperial space was to find a way past the Hyperspace Inhibitor network the Taidani had set up to prevent intruders from approaching Hiigara. These stations were so heavily shielded that they could not be detected by any form of long-range sensor technology. Fortunately, Captain Elson, before he parted ways with the Kushan fleet, provided the location of what was considered by the Resistance to be the most vulnerable inhibitor. The plan, in the simplest terms, was to punch a hole through the network by assaulting this hyperspace inhibitor to allow for the mothership fleet to continue their journey. Having come too far to be stopped by the hyperspace equivalent of a giant Ferris wheel, the Kushans once more sallied forth to destroy yet another obstacle between them and their homeworld. While the Taidani had numbers and a constant stream of reinforcements from nearby hyperspace gates that were unaffected by the inhibitors, the Kushan mothership was inevitably able to add another mark to her increasingly large kill count. Now, finally, the way was open for the exiles to make the last jump to their long-lost homeworld of Hiigara and be reunited with the birthplace of their people. But Emperor Riestiuu had a plan within a plan to deal with this increasingly maddening threat to his rightful dominion over his empire. By attacking the hyperspace inhibitor, he knew where the fleet was and what vector they would use to reach Hiigara, and with this knowledge he could determine the exact point in which to interdict their hyperspace journey and spring the trap that would finally crush this troublesome fleet of exiles and prove to the galaxy the strength of his power. Forced out of hyperspace yet again, Fleet Command found themselves on a collision course with an asteroid that was hurtling towards the mothership. This headshot asteroid had engines grafted onto its surface to propel itself at a speed that would greatly expedite the matter of reaching its target. Normally, an asteroid, even one equipped with engines, would not be too much of a concern to a fleet of battle-hardened veteran warships. However, Riestiuu knew this, and made sure to have an entire fleet of Taidan ships escort the asteroid to its intended target. Unable to escape, Fleet Command was forced to give the order to stand and fight their way through. The ensuing battle was a desperate struggle to the bitter end, with a headshot asteroid acting as a fatal yet slow-moving countdown. But eventually, Kushan ion frigates and capital ships were able to turn their temporary nemesis into another asteroid field, much like the others spread out through the void of space. The Taidani, on the other hand, perhaps not willing to face the wrath of their mad emperor, fought and died to the last. Now, there were truly no more obstacles between them and Hiigara, and the Kushans eagerly began what was to be the last hyperspace jump of their exodus. But Emperor Riestiuu left nothing to chance, and had another plan if the headshot asteroid failed. In the span of time it would take the Kushans to engage his forces, he would rally as much of the Taidan navy as he could to defend Hiigara, where he would personally lead the defense from his own Taidan Imperial flagship. And there was more still. Now that Karen Sajet and her fleet were closing the distance on Hiigara, Riestiuu was able to directly contact Karen, and somehow, disabled her command and control systems that drove the logistics of the fleet and operations of the mothership. Thankfully, emerging from hyperspace near the homeworld, the situation had suddenly went from a triumphant march home to a desperate struggle for survival. With Karen no longer operating as fleet command, the voice of fleet intelligence, Sinsk Sajet, was forced to take up the mantle of leading the fleet. A laborious task in the best of times made near impossible by the incoming Taidan forces descending upon their fleet, like ravenous predators catching the scent of a wounded prey. Wave after wave of Taidan capital ships and frigates threw themselves at the mothership, with none succeeding in breaking through the Kushan formations. But eventually, little by little, more Kushan ships fell to the continuing onslaught. No amount of grit and determination could withstand the seemingly endless strength that Taidani could bring to bear on them. And with fleet command disabled, and fleet intelligence struggling to turn the battle in their favor, it seemed the Homeworld War was about to end tragically just as the dream of Hiigara was within the exiles' grasp. But just then, Captain Elson and the fleet of the Taidan Rebellion jumped into the system and began engaging the Imperial fleets. And together, the exiles and the rebels were able to turn the tide and break the back of the Imperial Navy. With their forces united, they quickly seized the initiative and brought their ships to bear against the last thing standing between the Kushans and their homeworld, and the rebels their freedom from tyranny: Emperor Riestiuu IV II. Everything that had been building up to this point in the past year, from the burning of Karak to this final battle over Hiigara, led to the mad emperor of the Taidan Empire. The Homeworld War would never end until Riestiuu was deposed from his rulership. In a climactic showdown, Kushan warriors and Taidani freedom fighters fought through the Emperor's elite guard and struck at the Emperor's flagship. And in a stunning display of coordination and battlefield acumen, both groups managed to destroy the flagship, killing the Emperor and ending his tyrannical reign. With Riestiuu dead, Karen was free from his influence and resumed her role as fleet command. But even with the Emperor dead, the Taidan imperialists would not give up Hiigara without a fight, and the Taidani on the planet below would doubtless do the same. As the Kushans began to consider these notions, their longtime allies, the Bentuzi, returned. But they did not come alone. Emissaries from the Galactic Council accompanied them, and with their authority, the Bentuzi declared the war to be over, and that Hiigara would return to the Kushans. The Homeworld War changed everything in the galactic landscape. During the course of a year-long campaign, the Taidan Empire, perhaps the largest and most powerful government in the galaxy, collapsed. In their stead, a new people would eventually arise to take their place, the Kushans. But now reunited with their long-lost homeworld, they could call themselves by their true name for the first time in countless millennia: Hiigarans. The Homeworld War was over, but the tale of the Hiigarans had just begun.